evolving process. You're going to learn a lot about this process that we are undergoing as far as a revolutionary new revenue cycle management process. We wanted to have a t-shirt slogan, so our t-shirt slogan is first pass, first day, first touch. So you'll learn a little bit about that. We didn't have time or budget to make t-shirts, so please forgive us for that. I'm going to have Mark start off by telling us a little bit about the forensic journey, and then we'll talk through about our lean journey and how we're trying to run these parallel processes, how we transitioned from a lean event orientation to kind of a new vision for lean in our division. And then we'll talk about the experiments that we've been doing using the East Bay team and talk a little bit about our experiences over there. So without further ado, I hand this over to Mark.
Thank you very much, Allison. It's a pleasure to be here. As you may know, the forensics group was formed around September, and I'm quickly rounded up all the geeks and freaks, you know. to work on analysis. And the reason is when you do some advanced analysis, you get insights. And those insights lead to change, and change leads to benefit. And that's essentially what our department is all about, is to provide that infrastructure for insight. Now, what's the most important problem for us to think about every day? And that is, as you know, what's the most efficient way that the revenue cycle can extract $1 of revenue from that invoice? And that's essentially why we exist. And that's what we work hard on every day. So, with that introduction, great. So that's what forensics does. One of the interesting problems to think about is rework. And of course, one of the largest area of investment in the revenue cycle is in the rework space. And the primary driver in rework are defects. And of course, in our lean journey, as we know, defects represent waste. And that's something that we want to try to control. Every day, we have a technical barrier.
No.
Okay.
It's an opportunity. All opportunities, Mark.
Every day we get about an average of 5,845 new defects come into the department. And that represents kind of our beginning inventory. And one of the early discoveries in the forensics analysis was understanding our inventory. And why is that so important? Because if our inventory exceeds our capacity, then inventory grows over time and our efficiency declines. There we go. So one of the interesting observations in terms of understanding our daily defect inventory is that if we fail to finish up only 10% of that daily inbound defect inventory, over the course of 12 months, that inventory basically will grow to 207,774. And that's just if we're only 10% short every day, basically finishing our daily work. And so on January 13th of this year, the active tab for revenue cycle denials was 207,774. And that essentially was the accumulation over, as you know, many months. Okay, so what problem does that cause for us? Well, it turns out we have just under 200 people every day working in follow-up. And the good news, that's about the right number of people to work 1 day's worth of denials. But if we don't finish only 10%, in a year, we have people shouting at us every single day asking, where's my money? Because we have 200,000 items in inventory. Okay? So that's a very, very important order of magnitude insight. Okay, what does excess inventory do in terms of our prioritization? So as soon as we reach that day where now we don't have enough people to complete the inventory, we have to prioritize. because we don't have enough people to get it all done. And as soon as we prioritize, in typical AR follow-up, the standard prioritization is age and dollar. Okay? The problem with prioritizing over age and dollar is that as a receivable ages, the value of the dollar goes down. And the complexity of resolving that dollar goes up. So efficiency goes down. And so as the inventory exceeds capacity, efficiency goes down, and that leads to what we have now affectionately referred to as the aged AR death spiral, where your capacity, which is your labor component, that's the triangle here, you disproportionately allocate labor to older high dollar items which are harder and less productive to resolve. And what that contributes to is inventory increasing over time because the new stuff coming in doesn't get resolved early. So I have people shaking their heads. That kind of, it took me a year and a half of, hunkered down in my little office to figure all that out.
Seems easy.
You guys knew it. I should have come to you first, right? Okay. So just a couple other graphics before I move off of the numbers presentation here. The red line represents the balance curve over 12 months. So you start with $1 of balance, and over 12 months, we basically, at 12 months, no matter what state it's in, we try to get rid of it, right? The blue line, and this is important, the blue line represents the value of that dollar over time. Right? So as a percentage of the dollar that we're going to collect over time, the value of it goes down over time. That's a really important concept. The other thing that that's important to keep in mind is the number of bites at the apple we take on resolving a defect. So it turns out on the first pass, meaning the first time a claim goes out the door, it's a new invoice, it's going out the door for the first time, about 85 to 90% of those come back resolved, meaning they're paid, there's no defect associated with it. So we have, let's say, roughly an 8% of that difference is in a denial that we start working. That's our 5,800 items that are coming in every day. On the first attempt to resolve that denial, we're about 65% successful. And that's what the second line represents. So taking that little red section from the first pass, meaning the first time the batch of invoices went out, we have about 8%. That's that red slice in the top bar. If we start working that, those are the denials. And when we work that 8%, we're about 65 to 70% successful in the first attempt to resolve it. Okay, well, we get denials on denials. So we coined the term in forensics D squared. So maybe some of you have heard that term, right? So that's a denial on top of a denial. We worked it, we got another denial. Well, when we work that batch, now we're taking our third attempt at getting money, our success rate becomes around 10%. So by the time we get to making the fourth pass, we're down to less than 1% chance of getting any money. So why is that important? We want to be very careful about how many attempts we make to resolve the defect. Because with each successive attempt, the probability of success goes down logarithmically, okay? Which means a lot. Okay, finally, just to kind of wrap up the numbers piece here, you're probably familiar with the match net collection ratio metric that we're very fond of. And what this shows is how match net collection ratio, which is basically the gap between what we think we're going to get and what we actually get. And we've set a target of roughly around 96% of what we think we're going to get, we actually get. And this curve shows you, and the most important thing to get out of this curve is the fact that it accelerates in the early months, meaning that's the period during which the payers are responding to our invoices and the cash is coming in. And the good news is it tends to come in fairly quickly. And that's most reflected in our AR days number. What's really important is by the time you get out around 4 or 5 or 6 months, the ability to influence it goes down precipitously. Why is that important? It means that our best chance, again, of resolving defects, of getting our money, is early. And so that's the primary takeaway in the forensics analysis, is we can be successful, we have to resolve our inventory every day, and we have to take the fewest number of passes that we can, the earliest we can, on resolving that inventory. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to our lean consultant.
So, for you who don't know me, I'm Tatiana Prokopenko. I'm a lean consultant from the lean team, and Megan is my co-partner in that. And early on in the journey, we were asked to join the, how did you call geeks and nerds team? to use the right approach to get us where we want to be. So in lean, in order to practice lean, we need to certainly know where we are and where we headed. And the difference between, or the path, if you look at the representation here, we know where we are. We know where we headed. Data speak to us. We need to use less steps. We need to be more efficient in collecting money. But how to get there is very unclear territory. There's a lot of obstacles that we potentially know, or we don't even think of them as an obstacle at this point. So in order to bridge the gap between where we are and where we need to be is called lean thinking, or PDSA cycle. PDSA stands for plan, do, study, adjust. So let me walk you through a quick PDSA cycle so you will understand better what it is. And you can see at the top, practice, practice, practice. In order to be successful in using the lean methodology or problem-solving cycle, you have to practice this. And let's see why. What's in the cycle that we are practicing? First, we understand the direction. We need to set the goals in order to know where are we heading. Second, we need to grasp the current condition. So where are we right now? And third, we need to establish the target, meaning how far do we need to get there? So we have a goal, we know where we are right now, and we know where we're heading. Now we are practicing it by assessing it often. Why is it important to assess and walk through this exercise often? Because you learn. Every time when you go through that, you learn something new. And the more often you do, the more often you learn. When you learn something, this doesn't work, or this is not an obstacle, or this is something that we need to fix, what do? We fix it. We apply some process improvements and we fix it. So it's important to do it as often. And within team, we establish a daily huddles. So we learn about the process, about how to head towards the direction we are heading on a daily basis. Another important point about this cycle is you can see there's a learner and a coach. You're never alone on the journey. You always have a coach who helps you guide through the process, and you are, as a learner, you learn a lot on a daily basis. A lot of times we learn on an hourly basis, and that's how we walk through the process. So we established some, you can see leader standard work. There are some standards that we apply to go through the process, and you are coached on a daily basis. Any questions?
Questions for the end?
And now, Allison.
So you'll see we're doing a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of moving parts. Back in July of 2014, we did a VSA with our management team, and that was, basically like a high-powered RIE where we get in and we want to talk about our journey for the next year. What do we see as our goals for the next year? And we wanted something that was revolutionary and more lean as far as our revenue cycle development. And so Mark had brought up this idea using forensics to drive where our areas of opportunity are in the revenue cycle. And so I think a lot of the managers that were there were probably thinking like, sure, we'll do something revolutionary, we're going to get the, and I don't know that we fully grasped the concept. It sounded great, on paper, but I don't know that we really grasped the concept of it. And so we walked away with an action plan of, I like how Mark puts it here, mostly old school RIEs. So what we wanted to do was look at platinum billing, or look at Sutter Care at Home, or talk about how we would improve our match net. And we didn't really know how to do that, but I think if you look at what Tatiana was just describing, we were talking about, continuous improvement cycle. Well, we've used a lot of lean tools in our division. We know what daily huddles are about. We know what MDI is about, right? Pareto charts, issues, logs, et cetera. But we really had this kind of action plan oriented thinking. We just had to do this list and then everything would be perfect, right? Not really. So the only non-old school event that we had was create this data-driven billing cycle. So in October, we decided to try this. It wasn't easy to get us to the point where we were able to do that. For those of you that were on the core team, I think probably Michelle and Rosario, we had a lot of pain. And I know that fights with Tatiana, I won't say fights, but trying to get data that we needed to do these events. And so we finally had the data from Forensic Analytics, but we really wanted to figure out what were we going to do with this revolutionary process for our revenue cycle. So what came out of that event was old school action items. We had the benefit of Chris to explain the death spiral. So that was a new concept for us. I think most of you saw the report out from that RIE. And we still had the same old list of, if you do these 10 things, then everything's going to be better. That wasn't the case. So it was actually really great timing because Mark was just compiling the team of freaks and geeks, is that what we're calling us now, for this daily huddle. And we really got a synergy because instead of doing this checkoff list of these action items, we determined that we were going to do a daily huddle and use the East Bay team as our petri dish. So they so fondly got to be used for that. They weren't really on board with that at the beginning, but once they determined that they were on board, it was great. But we used them to try these incremental daily improvements. And so it was really a learning process for us. So you'll see in the beginning part of this, we kind of have some parallel stuff going on. We have the Forensic Analytics team coming together. We have new tools from the Lean Journey coming together. We're doing this daily huddle. We're actually taking the data on a daily basis and evaluating it and figuring out where do we need to go from here. And that leads us from a journey from the event orientation to really the perpetual struggle of daily improvement. So Christine's going to talk to us a little bit about the journey where we started in October and where we are today. I'm not going to do all your clicking for you because I know you have animation. But I don't yes. You have it rehearsed, right?
Huh?
Yeah?
4 clicks.
4 clicks. All right. You go.
This way, though. Hi, I'm Christine Kruger. I'm the director of Freaks and Geeks. That being said, I actually really am a cool person. I'm a lot of fun to travel with, as Allison and Marjorie can attest to. He is really the freak and geek in the rest of us.
We're along for the ride.
Along for the ride. So in the beginning, back on, it was early November, we formed our club, which we called the Forensics and RIE 15 Daily Huddle. And you put a lot of smart people in a room at 8:30 in the morning, and you get a lot of crazy thinking. But we actually have accomplished a lot, and it has been a long process. Again, I think we learned every single day from the day before and shared our experiences and introduced rapid, agile change. At the beginning, our first goal was to complete everything. So we wanted to, all the denials that were received yesterday, we wanted to complete today.
We had to define complete. Oh, sorry.
So, as spoiler Allison has said, the first thing we had to do was really answer all these questions that we, so we have this great goal. But first we have to say, what is the definition of yesterday's first pass? So then you get Brian, Chris, Mark, and myself in a room to, scratch our heads and say, how are we going to measure this in the data? So we figured that out. Then we need to sit with the team that we are going to be experimenting with and say how many are there every day. And I think the first pass, people got really panicky, especially when 5 days into the experiment we got quadrupled in normal daily volume. And so that was our first real obstacle. Who should work then? we found that if you put too many people in the work queue, you get a lot of confusion, so they limited the number of people that were actually working in that work queue. What is the definition of completed? So that's where we started the concept of touch. We touched it. We took some kind of action with every single denial. What are the barriers to completion? And I think we had a lot of early on learnings about stuff that wasn't going into the queue, it was hitting a report, some of those types of things. So we had to constantly engage Marjorie and her team to help us with the automation. And then how do we audit? So you'll hear in the next segment about some of the tools that we've developed to support that process. So the next step was to understand the activities that are taken in follow-up work queues. So you guys eat and breathe this, and we don't. So we really needed to spend a lot of time with Karen and Rebecca to understand their language in terms of when they do a note defer, what does that mean? And we got educated on a lot of things, electronic versus paper appeals, redetermination, phone reprocessing, reopening, and a ton of other concepts that we had to, again, programmatically figure out how are we going to report on this stuff. That led us to the concept of resolved or unresolved. So by this point, we're probably in early December, I'd say, and when we got there, we have a new set of questions. What is the definition of resolved? And I think we pretty much all agreed that the definition of resolved is I've either written it off or I have, the next step is payment. So whether I change the primary payer, you're expecting payment as the next step. Where do resolved items go? And how long do we defer? So we had one work queue and we were seeing all of these things that we considered resolved to be reactivating. So we then decided to come up with a new work queue. Where do unresolved items go? So we decided to leave those in the first pass work queue. Again, the question, how do we audit? They had a ton of manual methods to audit the stuff, but we're trying to make their lives a little easier using data and reports. So again, as long as we have the data to help, we can automate it for you. So what was happening was manual tracking in all these little tick lists that the teams were managing. And then we also had this nebulous bucket of note defer that actually had resolved items in it, but we couldn't figure out what was resolved, what was unresolved. So we added stamps. We added new activities or reactivated activities such as appeal, change primary payer, and claim and process. One of the aha moments we had in analytics was learning that all of you are NRPing when you change the primary payer instead of voiding and reposting, which causes a lot of problems on the data side. So we created that stamp of change primary payer so that Karen would be more trusting that retro adjudication was happening when it should be. And then we could also follow up, defer those items for 2 days, and if it didn't retro, we can take a manual void and repost. So that led to automated tracking. We now have a report that can tell us what was resolved and what was left unresolved from the previous day. So now, today, we are at the successful or not. So if we've resolved it, did we get payment? And Brian's going to talk about that a little later in the presentation. So once we figure that out, again, we have these questions. How long do we wait for a response to a resolved item? And where do we put the D squared denials, the stuff that is getting re-denied? And so once we complete that, we basically loop back to the beginning and keep going and keep digging and saying, how can we become more successful at getting paid on the first attempt? So that was 3 months worth of 8:30 to 9 o'clock in a nutshell.
Or 9:15.
Or 9:15. The process ended up being more simple than I think any of us would have thought in the beginning, especially Allison. We had to force her to sit on her hands and not request 25 work queues. But we ended up with a first pass work queue. So any denial on a charge, the first denial on a charge is sent to the first pass work queue. I think I mentioned earlier the confusion with stuff that we considered resolved reactivating in the first pass work queue. So we created another work queue where we park all that stuff. The rep thinks it's resolved. She's going to transfer it to that resolved. Our goal is for that to be self-resolving. Nobody should ever have to go in and touch it. But it's also allowing us to really closely scrutinize anything that is reactivating in that resolved work queue and say, what could I have done better the first time around? And we also created 2 client first pass work queues. So worked with Sutter East Bay to know if they get a first pass coding denial, they need to resolve it and transfer it back to the first pass work queue. That's an overview of the process. I am going to now introduce freak and geek Chris Hall.
But you have to pick one. You can't be a freak and a geek.
Thank you, Christine. My name's Chris Hall. I'm a senior business analyst for the Freaks and Geeks team. We've been through a long journey, and I've worked with many of you building ad hoc reports on a daily basis, putting out fires. We've been going along in the data trying to solve your problems. Along this journey, what I'm most excited about is we've built a way to tell a cleaner picture of the data through reporting. So using the work queue model, we can clearly tell you how many touches we've had, what actions have occurred, how long it's been sitting out there. And we're able to explain that in a picture form so that everyone understands. So to start, I think Mark mentioned 5,800 or so denials on a given day. That is your little red bar there on the other clients tab. You can see in the scale that SCBMF is much smaller than other clients, as we all know, but the ratio of breakout for these different buckets happen to be similar. These buckets are all denials on a given day, and the red bar are the denials that are getting assigned to your work queue. The system is doing actions to other denials that post on that day that you guys don't ever look at, or you may when we get another denial. So we're able now to bucket those denials in categories, and we in the data are able to track and monitor those. And you guys are chugging away at the red bar there, trying to get everything resolved on a daily basis. So as Christine mentioned, we came up with this definition of completed. So using these stamps and activities, we're able to tell you if you got to all of the denials on any given day, the day of or the following business day that denial posts. So as you can see in our new process here for SCBMF, we're getting to about 92% of all denials posted completed within a 48-hour, if you will, business hour window. There is some opportunity, there's one-off scenarios that we run into where they don't go to the right queue, and we run into problems that are a constant struggle that we're trying to overcome. When applying that same logic to the other foundations and using those same stamps, you can see that about 36% of the other clients are getting touched within 2 business days. Now, we're not able to tell a clear picture, but that 36% isn't always a manual action taken either. So 36% compared to 92%, you can see where you're getting to things much quicker, as Mark said, is a positive direction. Alongside completed, because we have now implemented stamps and East Bay is using the stamps the right way, we are able to tell what is resolved and unresolved. So here is a good visual of, for East Bay, how many of the completed items that they completed, what they resolved and unresolved. Mark said if we don't complete about 10% on any given day, it grows exponentially to 200,000 or so in a year. Right now we're running around 70 or 30% unresolved on a given day, so you can see that it can grow much quicker. We're not able to do that for the other clients because not all the other clients are using the same stamps. Not everyone's educated on the processes that we're going through, so we can't tell a clear picture of how the other clients are doing with the resolution rate. And finally, Christine mentioned that we're able to audit. So, we're using stamps to drive this data. Well, in the data, we're able to know what stamps are being used. So why not provide to you all, the user, the stamp that was performed, the payer, all that detail you guys love and enjoy in a picture so that we can show you on the previous day denials what actions were taken on them, who done it, if you will. And so you have a resolved audit and an unresolved audit, and those stamps are broken up in different ways. Now, these are tools that we've been viewing and providing to the eSpell's team as a dashboard type of view. We are working towards a more useful tool. I'm going to pass that off to Brian Finn, my partner in crime here, on another tool we have for dashboard viewing.
Thank you, Chris. All right. So one of the goals of the forensic analytics team is to enable all of you, the RCS leadership, by providing you with actionable, accurate, and timely information related to these new processes that we're putting in place. This information is a whole lot more useful in the hands of